Good morning. Good morning. I'll call this meeting to order. Subcommittee, the ARPA Fund Committee, Appropriations. I'm having a little trouble with our microphones and speakers again, so we'll do the best we can to control that. We'll hear from 6 speakers today regarding request funds and needs of the ARPA funds that we have to allocate. And first on the agenda today is Derek Charette from the County Board of Supervisors Association. Welcome. You get to be the first in 2 days, and we hope you have a good report for us, that you don't need any money or anything like that.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity as the Mississippi Association of Supervisors to come before you and talk about the ARPA funds. Maybe I keep talking, it get better. Better. Keep going? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. First, I want to talk a little bit about what the Association of Supervisors has been doing for our 82 member counties since the ARPA funding passed. And then I want to talk specifically about water and sewer, because I think that's what particularly we wanted to talk about today. But since the ARPA funding has passed, Mississippi Association of Supervisors has been helping counties across the state, providing that they can draw down the money. And almost every county has drawn down the money directly from the U.S. Treasury. And that's something new for counties, to receive money from the U.S. Treasury directly. We've also helped counties find and identify the U.S. Treasury resources and guidelines to go by in interpreting the interim final rule. We have also assisted counties in meeting the reporting deadlines and in calculating the lost revenue calculation. When I say we have assisted counties, basically what we do is we provide counties the information to where they need to find the resources to determine the lost revenue calculation. Our advice to counties up until this point today has been to review the interim final rule and the information resources provided by NACO, National Association of Counties. They have been very helpful in this process. They have a direct contact with the U.S. Treasury. Secondly, we have asked counties to begin the planning process, just as you're doing here today. Thirdly, we've advised counties to inquire about assistance from consultants, agencies, state agencies, and additional staff members on their team. Basically, to reach out to whoever they can for help. Fourth, we've encouraged and advised counties to meet the reporting deadlines. In the reporting deadlines is the lost revenue calculator, which I mentioned earlier, and we've helped counties making sure that they're getting that done in the reporting deadline. Lastly, and certainly not least, we've advised counties to not obligate or spend the funds until the county has a clear guidance from the state and federal level, and until all significant changes in DC have been made. One change that we're awaiting is the Flexibility Act. The act has passed the Senate and is in the House. The House has a companion bill as well, with over 70 bipartisan co-sponsors, and MAS and our members have contacted our congressional delegation in support of this act, and hopefully it will pass. The act is I'm sure you're aware, it provides, just as the name says, a lot of flexibility to this that we could use in road and bridges and other governmental expenditures and disaster assistance. And that would be a great help to us. And that leads me into talking about water and sewer. Why do I want flexibility? As you know, counties do not have water and sewer infrastructure primarily. If we do, it's primarily going to be to an industrial park that we've developed water and sewer for. And in some cases, we may own a little bit of water and sewer that we have to upkeep. So where does that leave us with water and sewer, and that being a big part of the ARPA? I think if I back up, it gets a little bit better. That being a big part of the ARPA funding, if counties are to do water and sewer funding through ARPA, then we would have to give county funds that are ARPA funds to an outside entity, be it another city or a city within a county, regional authorities, or rural water associations. By law, the ARPA funds cannot be given as a donation or gift. And we've talked with the state audit department to get our information on this. So that means that the ARPA funds for water and sewer by a county must be a grant. And the grantee would have to certify that the funds were spent accordingly to the guidelines. And the county would have to review and document this process accordingly. Basically, what I was told by the state audit department is when you give a donation, you're done with it that day. When you do a grant, you begin it that day. So, and you have to follow it the whole way through. So basically, the Mississippi Association of Supervisors in our counties are concerned about this process. There are counties that do want to spend ARPA funds in water and sewer. We want to help rural water associations. We have some counties that want to help our cities. But as you obviously can see, we're concerned about how that's going to work. Clearly, this is uncharted waters. We've never been sent direct Treasury, U.S. Treasury funds to the county with the specification of use on water and sewer that's under the Clean Drinking Water Act. And certainly providing these funds to a source outside of the county, while the county maintains complete responsibility for the spending of those funds. And I want to stress that. Even though the county gives a grant to an outside entity, city, rural water association, regional authority, the county maintains responsibility for the spending. That's why we're concerned, obviously. So, how do we fix that? We've done a lot of work on my staff and with counties, and with the state audit department, thinking about ways that we can overcome this hurdle. I believe, and I would like to encourage this committee to explore the possibility of establishing a state level technical assistance service, similar to what Tennessee in this committee was on the video and doing for their state. I believe that we could leverage state resources with county resources, your expertise, with our staff, your staff, and with some consultants who have experience in this type of work. That would give us some assurance in doing this, and give us some more greater certainty in that we're doing it the right way. Even if we had a state level group to submit a proposal to and say, give this a look. Are we headed down the right road path? Is this the way we could set this up? That would help us a lot. As far as the lost revenue, there are counties that are finding lost revenue in their lost revenue calculation. And it's based on certain things that happened prior to the COVID and certain things that happened right after. And that varies. And the lost revenue can be spent on any general county expenditure. Y'all know this is the same rules for the state. So that's pretty easy to quantify and get our hands around. So the counties that are finding lost revenue funds, some of them are finding 50%, 25%, some even greater than 50%. They're in pretty good shape on trying to spend the money. The counties that are not finding lost revenue funds and have to revert back to water and sewer, or, you've seen some of the issues in the news that we've had with premium pay. And counties are having to really, really be careful. We just got off of a conference call with NACO, and they were saying they updated the premium pay frequent asked questions, and it certainly says you can provide bonuses. Well, not in our state. So that's what counties are having to be careful with. They're hearing bonuses from a federal level, U.S. Treasury, webinar, but you have to connect it back to the state level. So it's been quite the job for the association to try to connect those two. We've held webinars, in-person seminars. Every time we have an association meeting, we spend hours on ARPA. So that's kind of where we are, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I hope that helps give you an idea of where we've been as an association, what we're working on. We're not going to stop. We're going to keep looking for answers. We want to work with you and your committee looking for answers as well and trying to leverage our resources together. Thank you for the opportunity today. I'll take any questions you might have.
Questions from the committee? Senator Williams.
Am I understanding you right in saying y'all can't find where to spend all this money?
We certainly could find where to spend the money if we had more flexibility. In terms of, if you've got a pot of money and it says that you can only spend it on water and sewer, premium pay, or in grants to businesses or individuals, trying to figure out how to do the grant process correctly is complicated. But the lost revenue part, if every county could find lost revenue up to 100%, we could spend it real quick on roads and bridges.
Well, I think road and bridges, we all agree that's probably not going to qualify, but the same ARP qualifications that are true for everyone else are true for the counties too, correct?
Correct. And in lost revenue, you can spend that on roads and bridges. So
I mean, we've got tourism, we've got other things that are within that criteria. I just didn't realize the counties were, I mean, I assume that the money that went direct, if we're not being able to spend, then any monies that might come from what the state's got that we're really discussing today, that would be the same, correct? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. It's good that the county will be receiving money to address certain needs in those particular counties. Have you all been in a position to recommend different consultants to these counties? A lot of them are not familiar with how they can spend that money. Will y'all be identifying consultants and also giving technical workshops for them to keep them out of trouble? I would hate to see them spend that money while not having to pay it back and also getting in deeper trouble.
That's right. We have held all day long ARPA-focused seminars for our entire membership. Just had one out in Flowood just a couple of months ago. We have had numerous webinars. We connect our members up every time the Treasury has a new update. We take calls all day long from members with questions and concerns. And let me be clear. I think counties will be able to spend every dollar that's been allocated to them. But I know counties are concerned about how to spend these funds properly. They're worried about that. Because there, as you know, there are specific guidelines on how you can spend it. And then there are state laws that prohibit us from spending it a certain way. And again, this is the first time ever we've been in a pandemic like this and then have funding provided to us directly with these rules that apply to the entire country. And then let's try to take that square box and put it in our square box in our state. It's difficult to say the least. And if you're a county out there and you have 20 or 30 million that's been allocated to you with these specific rules, and you're trying to appropriate that accordingly, and you're trying to do a grant program, and there's nobody to turn to do a grant program, and you mentioned consultants. Yes, there's consultants and counties are working with them. But I can guarantee you nobody's an expert at this. Nobody's done it before. It's all brand new. So we're concerned about even our consulting that we are coming to us or going, we're asking them questions. Okay, is this going to work? How's this going to fit into our state guidelines? Is this grant going to be approved? Is the inspector general going to come back and say we didn't spend something right? Have to pay it back. So that's the concern. That's why we need desperately. You know, if it's one thing we need, and I've heard matching funds, I think that would be wonderful. Certainly. But if there's one thing that's top of our priority would be technical assistance to help our counties, to provide that guidance in how to spend this money properly, most efficiently and effectively.
Thank you.
If you had to name the top 4 or 5 things that you're hearing from your counties of what they intend to spend their funds on, what would those be?
Well, let me back up for a minute and say, you know, as our county supervisors, they're on the ground meeting with people every day. I think the #1 concern from our citizens is roads and bridges, right? So when they saw that roads and bridges was not included in this act unless it's in lost revenue, then the first call they made was that, you mean we can't spend this in roads and bridges? That was the first call we got. We got over that hump and they understood that they couldn't spend it in that unless they found it in lost revenue. The top areas that they would like to spend it in beyond roads and bridges would be broadband. And that's because they hear a lot of their citizens say, I can't get internet for my child. I have to go to the local McDonald's and sit in the parking spot. They hear that all day long across Mississippi. Y'all hear it too. Again, broadband is something we don't lay broadband lines. We don't run a cable company. So that would be providing sources to an outside source. How do you do that through a grant? Water and sewer. We hear that. Stormwater. We hear that from some of our heavier developed counties, and we do believe that some stormwater infrastructure can be done. It was mentioned about tourism. That has been talked about. That's probably the top. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your attendance today and we hear what you're saying.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Next is the Mississippi Municipal League. I believe Ccbhc is going to be the presenter for them. We look forward to your presentation. If you would, wait just a second for us to get these PowerPoints out.
Thank you, Chairman Polk and members of the committee for giving this opportunity to us to talk to you about ARPA funds. To begin with, I just want to tell you a little bit about MML. Y'all know about us, but there may be some folks on the committee that don't know our history, but we've been around since 1931. We currently represent 291 cities, towns, and villages in Mississippi. And we do a lot of education and training and of course advocacy. Y'all see us in this building a lot. 85% of our member cities are under 10,000 and 52% are under 1,500. And I think that statistic is especially relevant to the discussion that we're going to have here today about ARPA funds and water and sewer needs. think I just missed a slide. Okay. Just want to give you a look at who our current officers are, and I think y'all will recognize a couple of those folks as being members of the previous members of the legislative body. But our current president is the mayor of Greenville, Eric Simmons. Water and sewer needs, as y'all know, are one of the primary functions of municipal government. Their water and sewer funds are operated as enterprise funds. So funds generated by water and sewer rates can only be used for the improvement or operation of water and sewer services. Many of our Mississippi cities are currently facing some costly mandates through DEQ and EPA that can't be supported with their rate structure. So some of them are struggling with how to make those improvements. And that's where I think ARPA funds are going to be especially helpful to our towns that are under those kind of mandates. What I wanted to do today, and let me back up a little bit. I think I skipped a slide. What we have been doing since ARPA passed is just like Derek said, we've been doing a lot of training at every possible conference. We've done webinars with the municipal attorneys and the city clerks to talk about ARPA, the final interim rule guidelines, and anything that's come out that's been changed through Treasury. Just as they work with NACO, we work with National League of Cities, and they have a lot of dialogue directly with Treasury. So we've been able to keep our members updated as situation has evolved. But from the very start, when this bill passed in March, we have been encouraging our cities and towns to focus on water and sewer. We have, I think, 275 municipal water systems across the state, and about 225 municipal wastewater systems. So that's a huge need. So we've been telling them from day one, that's what you need to focus on. And we know that that is an approved approved expense with ARPA funds. So one of the things that the Lieutenant Governor had talked to our members about was, get with your engineer, talk to an engineer you've used, and get a good proposal from them of what you need to focus on and what it's going to cost. And that way you're going to know how much you have in ARPA funds and then how much you're going to need in any match. So I wanted to give you a profile of 4 different cities. And these are from actual proposals that they have sent me. I think they've also sent them to the Lieutenant Governor and to their senators and representatives. The first town, Town A, population is 210 people. The total funds needed for their water and sewer repairs is $586,873. Total amount of ARPA funds, $44,644. Just to kind of give you an idea of what's in this proposal, and I am not an engineer, and some of this stuff's very technical, above my pay grade, but some of these things are easy to recognize. But they need $67,500 just for a 6-inch PVC water main. For service connections, $2,500. Street repair above the lines, because when you go in and replace water lines, you have to tear up the street. So you'll see driveway and street repair is part of their cost as well, along with fire hydrant assembly. Town A, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry, I'm not. Okay, Town B, getting a little bigger. This town is population of 1,500. The total funds needed for their water and sewer repair are a little over $2 million. Their total amount of ARPA funds is $321,980. Again, you see some of the same items that were included in the proposal that their engineering firm did for them. City C, of course, above 2,000, they become a city. This city is 6,600 in population. Total funds needed for their water and sewer repairs, over $10 million. And they are getting about $1.3 million in ARPA funds. Again, they have a little bit longer list, but you can see some of the things that they need to have done included in this engineering proposal. And It's really amazing how much some of this cost, and I think it probably kind of lets you know why some of this hasn't already been done. It's because the cities just don't have the funds to do it. And so, like Derek said, we want to make sure they take advantage of the once in a lifetime direct appropriation that they're getting from Congress, and hopefully with a match from the state, some major infrastructure, water sewer infrastructure improvements can be made in this state. The last city is a bigger city, 25,000. They need about 32 million, and their total amount of ARPA funds is 5.9 million. This particular city is focusing on improving capacity, improving economic development. And then you'll see that very last item, they're trying to address some regulatory violations. And mainly these violations happen when they annexed into the city and there are still property owners that have septic tanks, and they are a problem and can cause pollution and other problems with the operation of septic tanks. So they're trying to have enough money to put them, run lines to them so they'll be on the city water system. That's really all I have. I wanted to give you those 4 profiles, and then I'll just close by saying the same thing that Eric has said. We are trying to provide as much training and technical support as we possibly can. We get questions every day about ARPA, but I think with the exception of just a few, most of our cities haven't, our towns have not done anything with this money. They're waiting, as we have urged them to do since March, to see what additional funds would be available so they can make the best decisions possible with these funds. One of the things that we would encourage in any kind of state match program that's established is that you would take into consideration, I think some of the larger cities have started using some ARPA funds, perhaps because they already had sort of a shovel-ready project that they were looking at doing to do with their water and sewer. So we're hoping that any match would take into consideration if they've spent any of their ARPA money. There's a few of them that I think have, but for the most part, I think they're just waiting to see what's going to happen in the session. We strongly support a matching grant program, and we stand ready to provide training and education as we always do. When legislation is passed here that affects cities, we spend a lot of time trying to make sure they understand what they're supposed to do and that they're in compliance with whatever the law says as far as what the state's going to do. And obviously we're working hard to make sure that they understand the Treasury guidelines, because some of that's already changed since March. So that's kind of a constant ongoing thing. But we're excited about the opportunity here and what this means for our state. And as I think the Lieutenant Governor said at our conference, it's an opportunity to make generational improvements with this money that will benefit not only the current citizens, but their children and grandchildren going forward. So we do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ma'am, for being here today. The 4 cities you showed us there had about a $45 million ask. Do you have any idea what the total ask for the cities you represent might be?
I really don't. And the only reason I say that is we have tried to get our cities thinking that. What I did is I reached out to the American Council of Engineers, the Mississippi chapter, Craig Carter, I don't know if he's here, and he got his membership. Most of them work with cities, a lot of them do. So they sort of sat down with cities they have represented and got some numbers together. But it's very difficult for a real small city or a real small town that doesn't have the resources to go hire an engineer to create a proposal, or so I really don't know. But I think that a lot of these things you can probably look at it by population.
Yes, ma'am.
And figure it out that way. But we're still working. I get a proposal in the mail every day. I've probably got 20 right now on my desk. But you know, there are 291 member cities for us, so that's just scratching the surface barely. So
As you have spoken to the different cities, these 4 that we looked at, I assume are what we would term either shovel ready or very close to shovel ready.
right.
As a percentage of the cities you represent, any indication of how many are sitting in that point? In other words, if the money came sooner than later, are we able to start writing checks?
No, but I think we can focus on trying to find that out before the session.
Okay, well, just curious.
I don't know that. I can't give you a accurate number, but we'll focus on trying to figure that out.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Parks?
Question. So I look at these projects, I look at the scenarios. Of course, even with the matching dollars, they don't come close. So do the cities have a prioritization, and do they believe that, and I know some of these have to go through a bidding process, can these projects be bid, processed, and spent within the time frame?
I don't know that all of these, if they have to pick and choose, I think that they'll look at the priorities as far as, a lot of them want to be able to address regulatory violations because that's a huge issue for some of our cities. But, you know, again, I don't know how many of these projects, I don't know what kind of match you're talking about. So it just depends on what the match is. But I think the proposals that we're getting, that they've done enough work on just pulling the proposal together, that some of these things are ready to go. But again, that's a big question mark. A lot of it will depend on how much the match is, as how fast they can move on it. So,
Sure. And thank you. I know those were a lot of hypothetical, but two, I'm sure these cities and you all have spent a great deal of time thinking about what you could potentially do and how you could move forward with it.
I think that you're right about that because I think they're sick of me talking about it. We've talked about it till we're blue in the face. So they've all got to be thinking about if they get additional money into what, in addition to what they have, what they would do first. And so I think many of them will be ready to move forward with significant improvements to their water and sewer once the grant program is established.
Sure. And knowing that right now, I don't think you can match ARPA with already federal dollars, but
You
I'm
can't.
hopeful that the cities have set aside some amount or something of that nature.
You cannot do that. No.
Thank you.
One question.
Mhm.
And I don't know if Mr. Surratt's left yet, but it's an interesting combination talking about counties giving grants to cities. Do you know of any that have been asked to do that?
No, not right offhand, but I do know that the law allows that. And we would certainly be open to that. I can't specifically say that there's a town that's approached their county, but he may know.
Do you know of any counties that approach the cities?
Not at this point, but that may have happened. So.
And I think to follow up on Senator Park's question, in your scenario of A, B, and C, D cities, would the larger cities be able to bond out and come up with funds to finish projects more quickly and more easily than the very small towns?
I would think so, yes. I definitely think that would be the case.
All right, thank you very much. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Next on our list is the Rural Water Associations. Mr. Kirby Mayfield, I believe, is here to speak to us.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here today and speak on behalf of the Mississippi Rural Water Association and its 1,057 water and wastewater members throughout the state of Mississippi. Currently, there are approximately 1,180 water and sewer systems within the state. Of that figure, this includes city, municipal, water districts, and out of this total, approximately 800 are nonprofit water and sewer associations. About 70% of these systems are smaller rural utilities serving a population of 3,300 or less, which computes to approximately 1,000 connections or less per system. Most of these systems was created in the late 60s or early 70s with USDA loans and grants from USDA Rural Development. These loans included 40-year terms. Back when these systems were first installed, they were designed to address the immediate needs and allow limited projected increased service to cover over a 10 to 15-year period. This is a common problem within the smaller rural systems that are served lower income customers as a result. Having a very limited financial and human capacity to adequately upgrade their systems without affordable financing options and direct technical assistance. The end user rates are the sole source of the income for the majority of these systems. This revenue stream is used for the entire utility daily operations, staff, billings, power, office, maintenance, equipment, testing, and the list goes on. And that funding stream must also be used for these upgrades that many times are required to maintain safe and affordable water and wastewater services. When the ARPA funds first come out, we asked for a survey of all of our systems. And out of the 1,057 utility member survey, we had 346 to respond. The 346 utilities represented 384,000 water connections and 73,000 sewer connections, which is currently serves over 1 million residents in the state. The total projected cost for these 346 utilities totaled $700 million. And that is considering our sample is based on responses that represents 1/3 of our membership. With all the current and forthcoming state and federal regulations, it is becoming more difficult for some of the systems to remain in compliance without a very expensive upgrade to the treatment plants or obtaining alternate sources through construction of a new well or by connecting to other systems such as regionalization or consolidation. Please remember that most of our water utilities are small and have difficulty complying with federal water regulations and affording public water service due to the lack of population density and economies of scale. Mississippi Rural Water will continue to provide direct assistance to these systems in helping them to struggle with their compliance issues. Many of our systems are experiencing failing infrastructure with undersized and deteriorating water lines, worn out treatment plants, aging wells or depleted wells. An increasingly common breakdown is the number of deteriorating water lines that result in ruptures, breaks, and leaking service lines. Leaking service lines increase the cost of operations, treatment, electricity, staff, and also affect the end user. The national average for water loss nationwide is 18%. I stand here today to tell you that here in Mississippi, we have a state average of somewhere 35% or above. In some cases, we are seeing where these systems are just changing out meters. These meters was put in late 60s, early 70s, and the meters are not registering correctly. And when they come in and change these meters out, we're seeing a 10 to 15% increase or drop in the water loss just by the change of the meters. The Mississippi State Department of Health Bureau of Public Water Supply will soon, through their capacity development program, request that these systems do asset management procedures. Asset management procedures establish strategies to measure and plan for the investments and costs needed to properly maintain, operate, and upgrade their systems. We've been doing this asset management training for about 2 years now through a grant through the State Revolving Loan Fund, through DEQ and the Health Department. And it's going to become mandatory. And it's going to really help these systems out. Even though many of these systems are still providing safe and affordable service, their systems components are nearing the end of their useful life to sustain these services. Currently in Mississippi, we have 96 water systems that have significant deficiencies and are in need of capital outlay. We have 11 systems that's out of compliance right now. We have 5 systems that are under administrative orders through EPA, DEQ, Mississippi State Department of Health. Then we also have 25 systems that are under consent decrees. We have numerous sewer systems that cannot meet the total maximum daily allowance permits. Furthermore, there are many systems that are having compliance difficulties, where emerging or simply purchasing water from a neighboring water system would allow them to return to compliance or eliminate a significant deficiency. In many situations, the system would be able to retain its autonomy while purchasing the water that it needs for its customers. Sustainability over the last several years, making our systems more sustainable has been a top priority for Mississippi Rural Water, USDA, EPA, DEQ, everybody involved. Unfortunately, when these systems first started decades ago, many of the men and women sitting on these utility boards established rates as low as they could. They were thinking about their people out there on fixed incomes, and they kept these rates for as low as they could for years on end, which that was not doing the system justice. All they wanted to do was break even every year. Well, we all know that this is not a way to run a business, even in the water business. It must be operated as a central service in a sustainable manner. With that said, with the leadership of this body, Mississippi is one of only 3 states that requires mandatory board training. That was passed back in 1998. And 2 years ago, y'all strengthened it by requiring additional board training. And we are seeing the fruits of this legislation now. When I say that, we are seeing these systems constantly doing rate studies. I have staff going out almost weekly doing rate studies and meeting with boards. And the systems are raising their rates. 10 years ago, you could see the average water rate at average minimum bill at $14 and about $250 a thousand. Today, your average water bill is around $18 to $20 for the minimum bill and about $4 a thousand. So these systems are raising them. They are adopted policies to raise the rates on a yearly basis according to what the inflation rate is. That's highly recommended by us. This helps them keep up. I believe we have an opportunity to continue on this course with the training and technical assistance and any resources this committee feels is necessary to continue on this path to increase the health and sustainability of the water and wastewater portfolio in Mississippi. Mr. Chairman, compounding all these issues we just mentioned, employment data for the water and wastewater industry in Mississippi indicates that 50% of our workforce will be retiring within the next decade. We are seeing ramifications of this stark reality daily in rural Mississippi. Because of this problem, Mississippi Rural Water established a U.S. Department of Labor Registered Apprenticeship Program in 2020 to address this need for future operations. Our communities are in dire need of skilled workers to help ensure clean and safe water for the public, to maintain the water infrastructure necessary to keep these essential services economically viable. These operators serve as public health officials and are often the only person responsible for complying with all the applicable federal Safe Drinking Water Act and Clean Drinking Water Act. Unfortunately, a vast majority of Mississippi's rural and small community water systems have been able to attract, train, and retain the next generation workforce due to the lack of an identifiable career path coupled with low salary levels and population density. Also, Mississippi Rural Water is in the process of seeking funding to build a state-of-the-art apprenticeship and emergency response training center to prepare for the current and future needs pertaining to workforce development and emergency preparedness and response during times of disasters. In closing, we would like to offer these points: that we would provide targeted funding to communities that lack the resources to upgrade and comply with significant deficiencies with priority with health and safety violations. Provide funding to communities that lack the resources to upgrade and comply with EPA, help in Mississippi State Department administrative orders, consent orders, moratoriums. Lots of our systems are under what they call a moratorium. They're reached their capacity level. Their health department may say they can have 1,000 customers, and when they reach that 1,000 customers, they'll put them on a moratorium, and they cannot add any more customers. So we would like to see that in part of the funding too. Additional funding to systems able to provide their own matching funds, providing funding and assistance for merger and acquisition of smaller systems, provide additional technical assistance to help these communities access funds, perform rate studies, remove health and safety violations. To back up to number 4 on the merger and acquisition, we have out there certificated areas, and they have areas out there that's not in nobody's certificated area. And that's what we call no man's land. And there is, the whole state has got the pockets of that all over the state. And usually it's not economically feasible for a system to run water out there to these customers, because it may not be with 10 customers, and maybe 2 miles of line they have to run. So we'd like to see some monies in there to help cover these areas that's not currently being served. And support workforce development activities to provide critical licensed operators necessary to sustain services. We stand ready and able to assist you in any way. So with that, I ask for any questions.
Questions from the committee? Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The survey that you referred a few minutes ago had about 1/3 of the respondents and about a $700 million need. I've been able to estimate what you think the total need might be statewide, and is the $346 million referenced, you think, a need or needs and wants?
The 700 million,
Yes, sir.
that's needs and wants. Yep. Some of them is wanting to change out to automated meter reading, because what I talked about with the meters being slow.
Yes, sir.
They're losing lots of revenue there. And I do have a copy of the surveys for anybody that wants them.
Do you think that if you tripled that number, it would be an accurate number? I mean, or you think most of the respondents that had need, or most of the people who took the survey had needs responded?
I'm gonna say the 700 million would be, if you doubled it, it would be there.
Is there any way to get an estimate on how many areas, you mentioned a moratorium a while ago, where basically economic development's at a standstill until we can get more water? Any idea to estimate how many areas that might be?
I would say you would probably have maybe 10 to 15% of the systems in the state.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I listened to you in talking about the Rural Water Association. How long have you been working with the Rural Water Association?
I have been with Mississippi Rural Water since 1990. So I've got about 30 years experience, and before that, I would actually run a water system. So I've actually been in the water business about 35 years.
Very good. Now, what do you see as a recommendation that the Rural Water Association will make to us and being able to reach the most needed individuals in the community? Rural water.
I think those, like I said, those with significant deficiencies, that's where we got health issues. That's what we need to concentrate on first. And just give you an idea of when we're talking about significant deficiency, you have what they call disinfection byproducts. That's where they have this colored water. To treat the colored water, you add chlorine. When you add chlorine, it causes this byproduct, which can cause cancer. So we have lots of systems that's got this colored water, and it's going to be a very expensive upgrade to fix this problem. So I think that that's one area we need to be looking at.
Okay. And how do you see addressing the communities in the rural area and working together to make that happen? How do you see addressing that?
Providing funding, these treatment plants are very expensive, but you could provide funding and put the treatment plant in and maybe do a regionalization where the treatment plant takes care of several systems instead of just one system. Or you may have a city down the road or a system down the road that has good water. Provide funding to run a line so that this other system can do away with their wells and start buying water from this system.
Thank you very much.
Just to be clear, how many rural water association meters are there in Mississippi?
Meters,
Meters.
it's going to be close to about 1.2 million
Meters.
meters.
Serving how many people?
Well, you would figure 2.7 to a meter.
So most of Mississippi's water is served by rural water associations.
Yes, sir.
How many, and I'm gonna grab a number out of the air, how many of your rural water association members have less than 400 meters?
50%.
Okay, less than 300 meters?
Probably 35%.
Okay. Would there be an advantage for the smaller systems with less than 500 or 400 meters to join together? And why haven't they done that already if it is?
We talked about autonomy a while ago. Some of these systems does not want to lose it. You know, they got the community name on the tank or whatever. These boards just don't want to lose that. But there's ways we could work around that and get that done. And that's true. And, you know, we still believe it needs to be voluntary that these communities and boards makes this decision. But we would be glad. We've got one system that started out with 200 or 350 customers. And they took the lead on this. And they took in 7 different little water systems. And today they got 2,700 customers. And they are a very viable system. But that's the problem. Lots of these little systems has existing debt. So this neighboring system over here may be doing good, and they don't want to take on this system with all this debt and put it back on their customers. So, you know, there's got to be a caveat there that we can give them out there to get them to merge.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is Child Protection Services. And Andrea Sanders is going to be our speaker from CPS.
Chairman. Good afternoon. Are y'all ready to proceed? I'm Andrea Sanders. I've been the Commissioner of Child Protection Services now for slightly over a year. Sometimes it feels like 5 years, sometimes 10. But we are closing out on really about 13 months for me now. I want to thank you all for this opportunity to address this group about appropriation of ARPA funds. And I want to thank you also for serving in this capacity. As a lifetime taxpayer and resident of Mississippi, I appreciate that our state is embracing a transparent, active process to consider how we spend these funds. I do think that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity in my lifetime, in your lifetime. And I feel very passionately that we should do some things with this money that really change the landscape for Mississippi. And certainly my slant is that I'd like to see them make an impact on children and families in Mississippi. I think that that's where we really start to move the needle. With that being said, I will address just a couple of matters. One that came to my attention outside before I came in, and that is that there is some confusion about where other ARPA allocations have gone, direct allocations to agencies. And I would clarify that Child Protection Services has not received any direct ARPA funds. The Department of Human Services has received funds in 3 of their programs. And I know that, you know, as much as we've all grappled with this, sometimes people still get confused about whether or not we are one and the same. So just as a point of clarification, we receive some CARES funding, but no ARPA funding directly. With that being said, I would just first tie the work that we do to the pandemic and demonstrate for you briefly how we think the pandemic has impacted the work we're doing now, and more importantly, the work that lies ahead over the next decade. Mayo Clinic put together a list of the top 8 risk factors for parents to commit child abuse, and 5 of those risk factors have been significantly impacted by the pandemic. This is not in my presentation, and I apologize, but I think it's important to think about. Number 1, alcohol and drug abuse is a tremendous risk factor for child abuse. Number 2, social or extended family isolation. By definition, our families have been isolating now for almost 2 years. Financial stress, such as unemployment and loss of income. Family crisis or stress, and physical or mental illness. There are 3 other factors that really have not been impacted by the pandemic and that we still continue to deal with as an agency. But I think that the collateral damage from this, the exacerbation of these factors will be felt for the next decade in Mississippi and across the nation and world. So with that being said, I'll launch into my prepared presentation. We have 2 goals with this funding that we're requesting today. One is a complete shift of our service delivery model, that we would reinvent the way we approach child abuse and delivering services to families, moving from a fairly reactive system that is heavy on the investigatory end of things. And the goal would be to move to a much more proactive system that looks at data and analyzes predictors of abuse, and that uses our funding to build systems that prepare for the types of children that we know we see on a regular basis in Mississippi, and begin to focus more around a family-centered approach to both preventing, reducing, and addressing child abuse when it occurs. The other goal is to exit Olivia Y. Now, to some extent, that's not entirely in my power, but we have made appreciable headway this year We've we've negotiated a rebuilding period that suspends 174 requirements and reduces them down to 4 specific focused areas that we have to show progress on by January of 2023. This lawsuit has gone on for 17 years. Olivia was a real child. She would be roughly 21 years old now. And the state is in a better position in some regards in this lawsuit, in that we have reduced the number of cases on caseworker caseloads appreciably in 17 years. And we have brought attention to the importance of this work. But we are stuck in a holding pattern in this litigation. In terms of just fees, in the last 17 years, the state of Mississippi has spent $80 million on this lawsuit. We pay the plaintiff's fees, we pay defense attorney fees, and we pay the monitors to tell us whether or not we are winning in our efforts. That's strictly fees. It has nothing to do with the cost to the agency, the cost to morale, and the outcomes that are being produced for children. Our focus is a shift to thinking about the fact that family really matters. And that can be more than just your traditional family. But we do want to start with where the child is and look for ways that we might prevent removal of that child. What would it take to get a child to stay in their home safely? Sometimes it's just a bed. Sometimes it's a safe place to sleep. Sometimes it's a mitigation of, a heating system in the house that's unsafe for the child to be around. It also means partnering with other community supports and with families and communities, and sort of shifting that model of being a heavy-handed investigatory agency. That is a necessary part of what we do, and it is our job to protect children, our first and foremost. But there's a lot of research that indicates that one of the best ways to protect children is to prevent child abuse and/or to look for ways that we can keep them in their own family or an extension of their family. Look intentionally within their circle of orbit. It might be an aunt, it might be what is called fictive kin, so a coach or a Sunday school teacher that cares about them, but that's going to be the least traumatic way to address the situation for the child. And then to look very intentionally for ways that we can either reunify that child with their own biological family or use ways. You've already passed a bill to allow for other types of guardianship. We just haven't funded it yet. But we have a mechanism for durable legal custody so that if a child goes into an aunt's care, they can be moved out of our custody and into permanent custody when the court finds that it's appropriate. The biggest barrier to that happening right now is funding. The family loses all financial support if they take durable legal custody of the child, but if they remain in the state's custody, they can receive foster care payments. So judges, concerned workers, it's better to leave them on our rolls right now. I'm going to tell you right now, no matter how good we get at doing our job, we will always be a poor substitute for a family, for a child. We stand in the shoes of their parents, and we're never going to be that good at it. We're a state agency, we're a bureaucracy. So our focus is to try to really shift to where we put children in some form of family setting, whether it be their biological, an extension of that family, a foster family, or a permanent adoptive family. So the American Rescue Plan is one-time money that we think can help us make the shift We have to continue doing business as we do right now. We don't have the luxury of stopping for 1 minute. It's 24/7 work. Child abuse happens around the clock. But this additional funding would help us shift to a more public health-oriented preventive model that should pay dividends over the course of years in Mississippi. Our total request is $75 million over 4 years. The first thing that would do is $32 million of that would be allocated to purely changing our staffing patterns. Mississippi, one of the biggest reasons that we have remained non-compliant with the Olivia Weiss settlement agreement is that we don't have enough case-carrying staff and supervisors in the right places at the right time. And that requires a fundamental, first we need to add additional case-carrying staff, and we need to add corresponding social work supervisors. We have to have a 5-to-1 ratio. Every 5 workers requires a master's level supervisor. And then we think that adding 82 additional case aides, at least 1 for every county, will help support that work. Someone who can help manage documents, take children to doctor's appointments, schedule doctor's appointments. Our caseworkers are trying to do it all right now. So this is an investment in the children directly through direct care. We anticipate that this would be a diminishing cost for the state. We need to staff up so that we can make a shift in the agency's functioning and a shift in our organizational structure so that we can more nimbly use staff where they're needed as they're needed. Because this work is it's not completely predictable. Having artificial boundary lines of county located offices that are difficult to cross within our system limits us in our ability to be nimble and respond to the need as it arises. We would anticipate that this cost would diminish. We estimate 10 million in the first 2 years, down to 6 million and then 4 million. Did I say that right? 8 million and then 4 million. We roughly have the resources we need long-term to support these workers if we shift the way the work is delivered and the structure within which they deliver it. The next part is to invest in families and communities. We're asking to dedicate $25.2 million over 4 years to intentionally build a continuum of care. Right now, Mississippi spends a lot of money on placement of children. The bulk of our expenses, in fact, are either salary related or cost of living for children. Our goal would be to contractually leverage that spending in a way that intentionally builds a continuum of care that targets all of the types of children that come through our doors. If you ask any youth court judge today what they spend the bulk of their time on, and 4 of my 9 executive staff at any given time, it's on placements for approximately 20 children who are extremely difficult to place. They're chronically acute because they've been in multiple placements over the course of their lifetime, and they struggle to make attachments. So we want to do 2 things. We want to stop doing that to children. We want to get them somewhere stable early and keep them there. And then we have to plan for this group of children who really, they're already in our care. They're our state's children, and passing them around doesn't do anything to shift that cost. The state is paying for it. So we think that contractually building placements based on data for the types of children that we see and what their needs are is the smartest way to use that money. The other part of investing in families and communities is to contractually enter into to build systems that deliver care intensively in a community-based setting. We have a program like this that has been funded for about 3 years. It's a little overly prescriptive for every child. It's a little too much intensive intervention. And because of cost constraints, there's a long waiting list for it. But there's no doubt that it prevents disruptions of placements and long-term residential care of children. It gives us a lot more tools to keep children in a family-based setting. $1 million is set aside to focus on investments in communities. We know that there is a tremendous philanthropic and faith-based outpouring for the work that we do. I never go anywhere that people don't ask me, what can I do to help you protect children? So we want to start to spend some money internally to intentionally leverage that instead of letting it be a passive response, to start to build out systems that are integrated into the state system that would allow us to leverage that support. We're asking you to invest in Mississippi's future. There are roughly 1,200 children right now in care who are between the ages of 14 and 18. These kids have poor outcomes. They don't get adopted at the same rate that young children do. They often move from one placement to another. Right now, they're not always intentionally kept with their siblings because of placement issues. We would like to invest in this group. These are the future adults of Mississippi, and we will get what we pay for. I've met with and listened to these children in multiple environments, and they have ideas about what would improve this system. And there are numerous foster youth who've aged out of foster care who've gone on to come back and reinvest in building systems across the country. I would like for us to fund comprehensive funding for driver's education, make it a priority for every child to exit care that's able to leave with a driver's license, and some plan for their future life, work skills, college, education. We want to intentionally support them in healing from the trauma that's been inflicted on them, and then becoming responsible, functioning citizens in Mississippi. This would involve a complete program redesign and extensive professional development for our own staff. We have a transitional youth program. It is largely checking a box right now and trying too hard to manage an overwhelming caseload. This population needs very age-specific interventions. And finally, the last ask is for $4.4 million over 4 years. Each of these was over 4 years, by the way, to promote guardianship and adoption. And what I found when I got to the agency was the work that we do is 50-50 social work and legal. We're taking people's children out of their homes. There are due process concerns. There's moving children around within a system. We're legally responsible for these children. And so in a year or two, I will probably come back to you with some data and some recommendations about how that legal system looks, how the procedure happens for children as they move from door to door, inside into the agency and then out of the agency. But right now, I'm not prepared to make recommendations like that. I do know that we need intensive help right now moving children through the termination of parental rights proceedings. We have 600 children who are waiting and ready for termination of parental rights and can go live with an adoptive family as soon as that happens. We have roughly 600 more who are in various stages of being, the judge has determined that they're ready for adoption, but there are numerous legal barriers to overcome, either old adjudications from a judge who no longer sits on the bench, that, you know, there may be a finding that wasn't made, or there may be language in an order that wasn't put specifically in that order, but that a good attorney can look at and say, this still meets the findings requirements. So there's a lot of tedious work to clear a backlog of cases, but that could be a game changer, both for our caseload numbers for Olivia Y. It could be a game changer for these children. And I'm pushing my staff internally to see this as a tremendous priority. Don't send a case back and tell them they've got 3 more months to fix a problem in the case. 3 months in the life of a 1-year-old is 25% of their life. You can do the math from there. Every month matters for these kids. So, and it, you know, if you ask around, I've been a little surprised at the number of people I know personally who have fostered children, which is a tremendous ask. And then they're willing to adopt those children and they're waiting patiently on the system to catch up. I will say that I've had a tremendous support and cooperation from the General Fitch's office. We have embarked together on a small pilot to look at using contractual legal services. We've learned a good bit from that. The governor supported us with some of his CARES funding, very small grant, $75,000. We probably learned more about the legal process and the barriers we face than actual number of cases that will make it to a completion of their TPR before that funding runs out. But it definitely uncovered a serious challenge in the system. So how is this sustainable? Does it make any sense for us to invest $75 million if we're not going to have that in 4 years? Does it leave the agency worse off? The answer is no. We've crafted our request in a way that we think it pays for itself. First of all, it's a $75 million request over 4 years. That amounts to 18.75 on average each year, although some of the expenditures we anticipate tapering off through the course of the 4 years. Just looking at the low-hanging fruit, we spend on average $40,000 on each child that's in foster care per year. So if we reduce the population that stays permanently in foster, that not permanently, but that is on our caseload in foster care by 15% in the next 4 years, that saves $19 million a year. If we exit the federal lawsuit, we save that $6 million a year in fees that we're spending every year, day in, day out. I would assert to you that the cost to the agency and to the state is much, much higher than just the fees we pay. We think this shift is important because we think that investing in families matters. We think that family matters in Mississippi, and it shouldn't be a privilege for some kids. You should have the ability to be in a permanent family, whether it's your own biological family or a really good supportive foster family for a temporary period of time, or better yet, in a permanent, we call it forever families with children. But nonetheless, the evidence is very clear that the sooner we get children to some permanent situation and the longer we keep them in a family-centered placement, the better their outcomes are. In closing, I would ask that as you consider my specific request, that you also consider that any investment you make in this state that benefits children and families will impact the outcomes for the children we serve, particularly investments in mental health treatment and alcohol and drug treatment. It's one of the biggest causes of abuse and neglect. And I would say, as a citizen of Mississippi and a resident of Jackson, Mississippi, it's alarming to look around and see the number of people walking around on the street who are clearly exhibiting signs of addiction. And I think that treatment is long-term the way that we turn the corner on that. The other thing I'd ask you to consider is that you're going to be asked to invest in education, in mental health and drug treatment. I would ask that you always consider foster children as a special population in Mississippi. They are our children, and we bear the cost for them one way or the other. So I would just respectfully request that each time you consider what you fund, these children are the symptom of pathology in families in Mississippi. And through no fault of their own, they depend solely on us to protect them. That concludes my presentation. I would certainly be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We have gotten a bit behind, so could you stay? And then after the hearings are over today, if any of our senators would like to come by and visit and ask questions, personally, I'd like for that to happen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next is Department of Mental Health, Wendy Bailey, I believe, is going to be our presenter. If you would, just give us a minute while we get the handouts passed out.
So in your package, you actually have 3 different documents. The first is a spreadsheet with our request over the course of 5 years, broken down by item. The second handout is a more detailed description of the items that I'm going to go over today and the funding amounts. And then the third is the PowerPoint presentation. So I apologize for the trees that I killed and overwhelming you, but I wanted to make sure you had all the information that we would be discussing. So first, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to present today. Some requests that, as Commissioner Sanders said, I completely agree. It's an opportunity to make a difference in the state, particularly with the population that we serve, which as the department, we have a responsibility for both mental health, substance abuse, and also intellectual and developmental disability. So you will see all 3 of those items reflected in this request. We have also conducted a preliminary review of the federal guidance to make sure that these items would be covered. We'll dive more deep into that too, but we have kind of reviewed that as an initial basis. So to start out, why is this funding needed? I don't think anybody in this room would deny the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the behavioral health needs, particularly across the nation, but also in Mississippi, and it can absolutely not be overstated. Over the last 6 years, the Department of Mental Health has spent a lot of planning efforts and funding and shifting funding to expand community-based services with mobile crisis teams, intensive community services in all 82 counties, looking at crisis response services, and that has put us in a better situation to respond to the pandemic. But this is also an opportunity that this funding could be used to address gaps in areas that are still exist and need to be looked at. We know this funding is needed based on just some initial statistics. We have a 24-hour helpline, and we had a 30% increase in calls in the last fiscal year to our helpline. We had almost 9,000 calls. When you look at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, we're a call center. Mississippi has call centers, and there was a 33% increase in the number of calls in Mississippi to the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. There were 9,223 of those. So you can see an increase in people seeking help or asking about how to seek help. You see an increase in those lifeline calls as well. You also have statistics across the nation that about 41% of adults now report symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder. There has been about a 30% spike in substance use reported by individuals, and we all know that it's most likely higher than that. And we've also seen a significant increase in the number of overdose deaths as well. So this is a breakdown of what we would like to do with the funding if it is approved. So we have built our behavioral health crisis services. Most of this is based on Samhsa's national guidelines for behavioral health crisis care best practices toolkit. So it is based on evidence-based practices and services across the state. It really follows three things, and that is that someone needs someone to talk to. They need someone to respond, and they need somewhere to go. So the very first ask is for 988 implementation and mobile crisis response team enhancement. You'll see legislation most likely this year on 988, but this was passed by the president, and it's national. It was actually passed in October 2020, and it directed the FCC to designate a one number. So it will be basically like 911 for behavioral health. This will go into effect in July across the nation, including here in Mississippi. So there has been a planning coalition working on this to determine how large of an impact this can make in our state. With this, we are estimating $4 million for the first year implementation. And that is costs related to technology, a dispatching system, and staffing. If you look at our mobile crisis teams that the community mental health centers operate, they had about 35,000 calls last year and responded to almost 12,000 with a face-to-face encounter. That's calling a 1-800 number that's each community mental health center has. If you know you can call 988 for a behavioral health crisis, and this is going to be mental health and substance use, we think that we're going to see a significant increase, most likely, in the number of calls to 988. This also includes additional funding for the mobile crisis response team. This is looking at about $1.4 million because we know with an increase in calls, you're going to see an increase in the need for the response from the teams too. The next is expand crisis stabilization bed availability. This is where to go. We have, since FY19, we shifted funds from the state hospitals and the inpatient programs to the community to enhance the number of beds that we have in the state. So we currently have 176 crisis stabilization beds. That has fluctuated this last year because of COVID and staffing issues as well. But we're asking for funding to expand that capacity to 60 more beds. So that would bring our crisis stabilization units up to a significant number. Last year in FY21, they served right about 3,000 individuals, and they have an 89% diversion rate. So that means if the person goes to the crisis stabilization unit, 89% of the time they don't have to go into the state hospital. Also, this is approximately $6.5 million for that request. We are also requesting for mental health first aid for public safety and expand crisis intervention training. Both of these are evidence-based practices. They train law enforcement officers in how to respond to a crisis situation. With this funding, we could train about 300 individuals in mental health first aid for public safety. And I've already had some initial conversations with MBN Director Stephen Maxwell about this. And then expanding crisis intervention training. We currently have 8 fully operational CIT teams in the state. What this would do is it would designate staff to help implement these and to do the training. And we could also contract with law enforcement officers to help with that training. With this, we are looking at being able to increase the number of fully operational teams and the number of officers trained. Just last year, there were 13 CIT classes. And then just in the first 4 months of this year, we had 151 officers who were trained. So these two requests together are at approximately $342,000, $300,000 for CIT and $42,000 for mental health first aid. The next section of services around behavioral health diversion. So these focus on diverting people from an institution to community-based care. The first item is to expand the availability of peer support services, and this is to pilot 3 peer respite programs. So these are a home-like environment. It's a day program. It would be run by certified peer support specialists. So those are people who are in recovery who have that lived experience. And it is an evidence-based program. There's some excellent models across the country for this, and we would like to pilot 3 of those, and that's at $1.5 million. The next is to have court, law enforcement, and hospital liaisons. So the purpose of this is to have an individual who works directly with the person who is coming in or is in the hospital, a local hospital, or is coming in to file a commitment on a loved one or somebody themselves, and connect them with the treatment that they need, the intensive service in the community, to hopefully prevent them from having to go to a higher level of care. So we have a few of these already, and then we've started a few more as well with some funding shift this year, but this would also add 18 more liaisons, and we would base this on looking at the population of the counties, and we would also base this on looking at the commitment data of where they would be placed throughout the state. And then we also have intensive community support services. Commissioner Sanders mentioned to you about that focus on foster children and children in CPS custody. Intensive community support services, this is a service that we would be required, of course, that the mental health system would work with other systems. So it's local schools, child protective services, and it is basically to reduce the recidivism of children rotating in and out of the system. So it's to wrap that service around the child and to be able to keep them in a safe environment and prevent them from being placed in an inpatient program, an inpatient psychiatric care. We would be looking at 7 of these intensive community support specialists, because we've been able to do this also with some funding that the Department of Mental Health received through Samhsa related to COVID. So this would put an intensive community support specialist for children and youth at the remaining community mental health centers. And then we also have a request for basically an adolescent offender program, and we would like to implement 13 of these. It uses an evidence-based curriculum, and it's for youth ages 12 to 18 who have committed non-violent crimes, misdemeanors, or other offenses. And it helps them receive both individual therapy, family therapy. It wraps the services around them to prevent them going back into the system. All of these behavioral health diversion programs are to be able to help people stay in the community. We have seen a significant decrease in the number of people at the state hospitals over the last several years. There were right at 1,769 admissions last year, and we want to see that number to continue to decrease. We know you have to have a continuum of care, and you're going to need that service for individuals who need that level of service. But at the same time, if we can get these intensive services in the community and wrapped around the individual, we can prevent them from having to have that hospitalization in a lot of cases. Then behavioral health treatment. So the first item is discretionary funding to the 13 community mental health centers. And this is an ask of approximately $10 million. So this would go to the community mental health centers to help fund treatment for individuals who have little or no ability to pay. We know all of the statistics and all of the national studies show that you're going to see an increase in the number of people who are going to be seeking mental health treatment and substance use treatment. And this particularly would go to help pay for that treatment for individuals who have little or no ability to pay. This would also be for adults and children and youth. And again, it would be mental health and substance use, so we say behavioral health. We also are looking at a medication assistance fund. That is something that has been started in our current fiscal year. It is related to the Department of Justice, the remedial order from the judge. We have funded it out of some initial funding that we received from Samhsa, and we would like to enhance that by $400,000, and that covers the cost of medication for individuals for a short time period. There's some details in your packet about how you can access that and how you also have to try to get on a prescription drug plan or get on or apply for Medicaid as well. So it is time limited. So the Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic funding, I put this in here. I think the next presentation by Mr. Roseman is going to discuss this. He'll have this in his presentation. We want to show our support for that. We think this is a model that has been shown in other states to improve access to the quality of care and the care across the state. So this is something that we do want to support, and I think he'll go over some more details about that. Intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we also have responsibility for Mississippians who have IDD, and we are seeing an increase in the number of crisis situations. So many times a crisis with an individual who has an intellectual or developmental disability may occur because the person has exhausted their current living arrangements and they have nowhere to live. I think with COVID, that's been enhanced by job loss, a lot of elderly caregivers. So we have seen an increase in this. What this would do is we would have 1 6-bed and 4 4-bed crisis diversion homes for people who have IDD. You'll see that the request for intellectual and developmental disabilities is significantly lower than some of the other items. That's also due to the enhanced FMAP, and we're going to have funding there to be able to enroll individuals on the waiver and some other things that we'll be able to do. And then we also have a request for a training and consultation plan to help with co-occurring. You have individuals who have an intellectual and developmental disability, but who also have a mental illness. And a lot of times that's very difficult to find the treatment, and especially in a crisis situation. So this would create a pilot program to help train staff and for us to have the expertise needed to provide those effective crisis supports. And it would be working with our programs and then also community programs as well. Both of these IDD projects are approximately together $3.2 million. Workforce development, we are looking at a request for paid educational leave for up to 60 nursing students. So this is individuals who, while they're in school, we pay them a certain amount of salary. They sign a contract and agree to come work for us following completion of their degree for a certain number of years. So this would help us, we think that this would definitely help us with the nursing shortage that we're experiencing as well. That request is $750,000. Then we have a request for the ARPA premium pay. This is for retention of critical employees. Our programs that are state operated have experienced, and the community mental health centers have as well, significant staffing shortages that are affecting the ability to provide the care and support that are needed to the number of people who need them. We have had to decrease bed capacity at times. The community mental health centers have had to decrease bed capacity. But for our IDD regional programs, you can't decrease bed capacity. That's their home. And we have to have the staff there to take care of the individuals 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with high needs. We have seen a decrease in the number of filled positions. To give you an idea, just over the past year, we now at October 31st, we had 5,130 employees across the state at all of the programs providing that care. So we have seen a significant decrease in that. So the positions that we would be looking at to provide a temporary, because of course the ARPA premium pay is temporary, a temporary 10% increase for classifications that have been difficult to recruit and retain. None of these would be administrative support positions. They would all be positions. There's 4,100 that we would be looking at. So this would be direct care, this would be nursing, this would be social work, laundry, food services, vocational training, across our program locations. And then, like I said, you have some more detailed about each one of these items in your other handout. And I would feel free to ask any questions if you have time. Tried to go quickly.
We have time for about 2 questions. Anyone? Well, you covered it well then. Thank you very much
We
for your
appreciate the
presentation.
opportunity very much.
Last on the agenda today is Bill Roseman who is the coordinator of our mental health accessibility. Okay, I think you can begin now.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to present before the committee today. I have with me Dr. Jerry Avery and Mr. Stephen Allen. One of the main responsibilities of our office is to evaluate the state community mental health center system. We have 4 recommendations that we'd like for you to consider today for ARPA funding for the community mental health centers. The first is demonstration grants for implementation of the Certified Community Behavioral Health Center model. The second is modernization of health information technology infrastructure for the CMHCs. Third is modernization of CMHC Behavioral Health Center facilities. And fourth is increase of transportation resources for community mental health center patients. Dr. Avery is going to discuss the first 2 priorities, and I'll follow up with the infrastructure and transportation issues.
So if you're confused right off the bat about the idea of certified community behavioral health centers, let me clarify that we do have certified mental health centers in the state. So if you were wondering, that is correct. We have 13 mental health regions. So there are certified programs in the state that are certified by the Department of Mental Health. What the Certified Behavioral Health Clinic model proposes is a different type of payment system and additional required services. Wendy talked about 4 important things that play a role in this idea of the Ccbhc model. One is she mentioned that overdose deaths are increasing. That's happening nationwide. Mississippi is a part of what's happening. She talked about the implementation of the 988 system, where she expects calls to increase around the state related to mental health crises. Well, if the calls increase, we want to make sure we can connect them with quality care out in the community. So as those calls go up, we would expect more people to be connected with the community mental health services that are out in the community. She also mentioned preventing higher levels of care. We all know those are quite costly, and we all know nobody wants a higher level of care than they actually need. So she talks about providing the appropriate level of care to meet that individual's needs. And then she also talked about workforce shortages. Those same shortages she's addressing at state programs is also happening at the community mental health centers. Mississippi is far from alone in that there are workforce shortages in the mental health community all across the nation. Due to these significant problems, these anticipated changes in the demand for mental health treatment, the CCBHC model has been developed. It is now in more than 438, or there are more than 430 CCBHC programs in the nation. That's a lot. And so what's driving this change are the things that I just mentioned, along with the fact that there are concerns that the current payment models just can't sustain the mental health programs. In Mississippi, you guys, I'm sure, are aware that 2 mental health regions have been absorbed during the last 8 years by other regions due to financial and operational challenges. There's been a couple of counties that have also left their region and joined another region for similar reasons. So what we're proposing today is the ability to look into and potentially implement the CCBHC model. So I'm gonna dive in a little bit. It's a complex system, but I'm gonna dive in just a little bit to give you an idea of what that means in terms of providing care. So it is a new provider type through Medicaid. It does not mean more people will qualify for Medicaid than currently qualify. The same amount of people will qualify as always have. It is a new provider type. So it introduces this idea of a prospective payment system. The prospective payment system, it is believed, will offer sustainability and financial support to programs while also requiring new services to be developed and implemented at the community mental health center that offer better quality and offer the ability for the CMHCs to sustain themselves financially. The model pays clinics Medicaid rates inclusive of their anticipating costs of expanding services. The way that differs from the way it is now, it's a fee-for-service system predominantly now. So basically, you provide the service, you get reimbursed. The prospective payment model takes into account cost reports, where they add up all the costs of the mental health center and they come up with a rate for that mental health center. So each mental health center would have its own rate under this type of model. States aren't moving to this model in one fell swoop necessarily. Many have implemented grants along the way. So the way 430 or more than 430 have been established in the US is first there was a Medicaid expansion grant or Medicaid demonstration grant. 10 states were part of that. Mississippi was not one of those states. Then Samhsa, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, offered some expansion grants. Mississippi has 3 of those now. Just this year, 2 more came on board. So 3 CMHC regions are recipients of the Samhsa expansion grants. Those grants last for 2 years and 2 years only. So what that means is the mental health centers that have the Samhsa grants can implement the CCBHC program. They can hire the staff that's needed because they'll have the money to be able to do that and to be able to compete in the community for the limited amounts of mental health professionals there are. And at the end of that 2 years, the money goes away. So basically you hire the staff, you do the training, you implement the services. At the end of 2 years, the money goes away because that grant is time limited. So what we're proposing today is that we use state funds to serve as a bridge, because it's going to take about 18 months to put something in place for finance. And the way Medicaid does it is the states are either doing an 1115 waiver or they're doing a state plan amendment. My understanding is our division of Medicaid is looking into both of those things and they're doing their own research on the CCBHC model. Most states are using the state plan amendment to be able to develop this prospective payment system. Because it takes 18 months to develop it, to get it into place and gain approval from CMS. If you think about the 18 months and the fact that 3 programs are now going, but they're already entered into their 2-year mark where they have 2 years basically of grant funding, there will be nothing waiting for them at the end of that grant funding. So we are proposing the expansion of this idea to 3 more community mental health centers in Mississippi, where it's a state program serving as a bridge until the prospective payment system can be reviewed, analyzed, and put into place. And again, that would take about 18 months. Creating the CCBHC model would basically require several steps. First is development of the PPS system. So you got to develop the prospective payment system. It doesn't currently exist. The capacity for mental health centers to develop cost reports is very limited. So being able to help them develop those cost reports. Division of Medicaid would have to set up the system itself. So you have to set it up, you have to get approval. Department of Mental Health would have to create a certification system to certify the CCBHCs. So while this bridge program could be in place to have state-funded, 3 state-funded CCBHCs at the same time, Division of Medicaid and Department of Mental Health will be working on certification standards and will be working on the prospective payment system. That is a lot going on at one time, but that seems to be the only way it can really happen is if all these things are moving at the same time. So we are proposing $12 million to fund those programs for 2 years. Again, being mindful of that 18-month time frame it would take to develop either the waiver or the state plan amendment. A few pieces of information related to other states that have implemented the model that you guys may be interested in is nationally the wait time. If you call for a mental health appointment today in the United States, the national wait time is about 48 days for an appointment. And if you just think about the reasons people pick up that phone the first time, either they have a serious substance use disorder, or they have severe depression, or they've had their first psychotic break. The things that are happening out there that people are calling the crisis line. Well, it's great to call the crisis line, but if the wait time is excessive, that's a long time between that initial call and that first appointment. And again, I'm quoting national, not Mississippi. Mississippi may be significantly shorter than 48 days, but nationally it's 48 days. The CCBHC model, for those who have implemented it, more than 90% are seen within 10 days. So that's incredible change in terms of gaining that first access to care. In Missouri, 85% of persons referred for inpatient care were diverted through the CCBHC model. So they did not end up in inpatient care, but were sent to those more affordable and also more appropriate services. 911 calls are screened in some states where there's a mental health professional available. So 911 sends the call right over to mental health. That diverts people often from going to jail when they don't need to go to jail when it's a mental health crisis. And it also diverts them from going to the emergency department unnecessarily. In Iowa, 50% were diverted from jail. 72% of CCBHCs provide services on site at schools. So again, going where people are instead of them having to drive to the center, and the CCBHC supports services off-site and off-premises. And if it costs about $500 for an emergency room visit and $10,000 for an admission to the hospital. So we know a lot of people end up in the emergency departments. I know you guys hear from physicians, and I know you guys hear from law enforcement. And I know both of those places want to be able to respond better in mental health situations, and they want to have the proper services provided for them so that they don't come into jails, which we know are very costly and unnecessary often, and emergency departments. So the savings from this, and because you get concerned about, well, it's a prospective payment system. So the mental health centers are going to be more financially stable. So where's that money going to come from? And the idea is that it comes from all the savings associated with diverting from jails, diverting from emergency departments, reducing the time spent in school systems where the teachers are dealing with mental health issues, and you're saving money out in the community as a whole. And also you're saving a lot of money by diverting to lower levels of care and appropriate levels of care. So the way it works is you don't get paid more for providing higher margin services, and you don't get paid more for providing more services that are needed. You get paid one amount. It's either a daily rate or a monthly rate. And the mental health center can predict exactly how much money they're going to be getting every month. And they can provide the services they need, which then go into the cost reports, which then help develop their individualized rate for their mental health center. So with the CCBHCs, we are proposing the $12 million for the 3 CCBHCs that would be state funded. We've estimated $750,000 for the support of consulting partnerships. A primary one being the National Council of Mental Wellbeing, which is currently working with Georgia and Alabama, moving along to South Carolina, and they've worked with a number of other states to develop their processes. Assist DMH with the creation of the certification process, research available revenue enhancements, facilitate the prospective payment system planning, and cost rate development. Determine whether the use of Medicaid 1115 waiver, state plan amendment, what would be best for Mississippi. Examine the budgetary impact on the chosen future methodology, and identify the most effective data platform for data analysis. The CCBH model, and we'll talk about that in more detail shortly, is heavily reliant on data because they want to see outcomes. That's the whole idea behind it, is to make changes, to make things better, and to provide those quality outcomes that can actually prove it. And funding recommendation 3 under the CCBHC was establish necessary human resources support by offering 3 FTEs at DMH to work on the certification process and 3 FTEs at Division of Medicaid to work on the prospective payment system. Priority number 2 is modernization of the health information technology infrastructure. This becomes critically important if we are to pursue the CCBHC model. IT is a critical part of that. Again, that is about data sharing between organizations, the ability to collect the data, analyze the data, measure the outcomes, and be able to share records. It also, for the mental health centers themselves, it allows for diagnosis, demographics, medication lists, prescription, electronic prescriptions. It allows for the movement into more significant telehealth availability around. Telehealth is now used for crisis care, it's used for therapy, it's used for medication management, peer support, and medication-assisted treatment for opioid use disorders. So telehealth has become a critical component. I'm sure you guys are all aware of that and have heard from many agencies about the values of telehealth during the pandemic. So in enhancing the telehealth services out there will also save travel time. It allows more staff to be dedicated to providing services instead of traveling. It also reduces no-shows, improves access to care, which is what this is all about, is improving access to care. And in some states, they've even distributed electronic tablets to law enforcement, where basically the tablet has a button on it. And if law enforcement needs to speak to somebody in the mental health center for consultation, or if the person they're talking to wants to speak to someone, they just press a button and it goes straight to a mental health provider. Again, diverting people from emergency departments and jails and providing access to care that will keep them in the community. In Oregon, CCBHCs are also receive notifications of emergency department visits. So basically, if one of their clients is in the emergency department, it sends a notification, and a peer support specialist, a crisis team, a therapist can reach out to that person and develop a support plan with them, getting them out of the hospital, diverting them from the hospital and those higher level, more costly levels of care. The funding recommendation for related to priority 2 was to contract with subject matter experts to conduct initial assessments to determine the need for and feasibility of implementing one EHR at all CMHCs. The CMHCs are on different EHR platforms. Some are newly developed. Some would like to revamp theirs. Some would like to buy a new one. Some just need one. And so what we're proposing is just to kind of examine and look at, is it possible to have one EHR that all the CMHCs use? And also identify the needed hardware and software to meet the demand for telehealth services. So that estimated cost is $500,000. And funding, it also included, I apologize, a shared platform such as Netscape's Care Manager, which allows for a system with near real-time data, streamlined state reporting, and automates the submission of outcomes data. Funding recommendation 2 is to make available funding for the support of technology that expands access to telehealth, supports health information exchange. So again, the ability to exchange information electronically instead of printing out papers, faxing them over, using up staff time, using up paper, and very valuable time. And it includes including the hardware, software, training, licensure fees, and maintenance costs. The estimation of EHR and telehealth or EHR implementation is $17 million. And last was to establish and maintain the necessary IT hardware and software to maximize functionality of telehealth platforms. So just to make that more widely available and offer the CMHCs the support they need to increase telehealth services in the community. And the estimated cost on that is $600,000.
Our third recommendation is for funding to modernize CMHC behavioral health facilities. One of our main charges by statute is to evaluate the adequacy and quality of services provided by the CMHCs across the state. In visiting CMHCs and trying to make these determinations, it's become very apparent that certain CMHCs are in need of updates to their facilities or construction of new facilities. It's clear that patients that receive services in modern, supportive, and therapeutic settings experience better outcomes, and they're also more likely to continue to go to treatment. There are some difficulties that CMHCs have with funding for infrastructure in general. One is they are largely compensated for their services by fee-for-service payment, which does not allow for funding for facilities. Additionally, federal grants generally prohibit any type of infrastructure or construction. So they're limited in their ability to fund maintenance to their facilities and new facilities. We're recommending $9.75 million be spent on infrastructure for CMHCs and a needs assessment to be conducted to determine which CMHCs are more in need of facilities. There's a great disparity throughout the state when it comes to the buildings that they operate out of. So that's our third recommendation. The buildings are they're owned by four different groups. It's either the CMHCs own the buildings, their foundations own the buildings, or counties own the buildings. That accounts for about 85% of the buildings that they operate out of, and about 15% we estimate are leased buildings, which of course can't do anything about those. Our fourth recommendation involves increased transportation resources for patients seeking services. It's difficult to provide every service in certain rural counties that at times requires transportation to neighboring counties for services. It can be difficult when you have a patient that's in need of, say, a service, a PSR service or service that requires, treatment, say 3 times a week, and it takes them 30 minutes to get there. It makes it difficult. It makes it difficult for them to get there to actually receive the service. We recommend $2.6 million. That would average out to about $200,000 per region for purchase of vehicles or a contract with public transportation service providers, or to leverage federal funding available through the Department of Transportation grants to increase access for those services for people who lack consistent means of transportation. So those are our recommendations to the committee, and we thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you. Mr. Roseman, any questions to the committee? I'm sure we'll have some as we proceed from here, but thank you very much for presenting today.
Thank you, sir.
That concludes the hearings for today. We will begin again in the morning at 9 a.m.